Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Kyle Kulinski went on Piers Morgan's show and debated with Michael Knowles, as well as this other guy from the Free Press, and Dave Smith was also on there. But people are passing along this clip because Kyle basically wiped the floor with Michael Knowles here. And in typical fashion, they're all just talking over each other. Really, what happens here is that Kyle just stands out over Michael Knowles, dunking on him and being kind of vulgar about it. But also, you know, it's easy because these guys like Michael Knowles are doing this neocon routine, and they feel empowered to do that right now because Trump made this neocon move and vindicated their worldview. But they just sound like such pieces of shit, and it's just crazy how much we've heard this. Everybody has heard this so much and is so sick of it. So if there's any strain of conservatism that is definitely on borrowed time, at least in terms of popular politics for the moment, it's this. So here's Kyle Kulinski talking to Michael Knowles.
But I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil. And the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said, is frankly not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America First actually meant America First. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is if you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law, or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes, they want to go super primitive style.
International law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity, whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal?
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
because we looked
not
at
merely
piles of millions
but it's true.
of
Woodrow
dead
Wilson
bodies,
failed
and
with
we
the
said
League of
that's
Nations.
a bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump can do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act I thought was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's your
problem is
criticism?
that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
and
that?
You know that what he's doing in imperialism and you don't care.
I just answered your question and I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal pedophile rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal pedophile rapist? Do you brought up a point. You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. That, excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did in fact fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Piers, let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know. Whatever his name is.
Well, and that's the
Garcia
problem, is that you're
Rodriguez
advocating for a regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I just said the opposite. I argued against a regime change.
He actually said the opposite.
I
heard Michael Knowles.
I just want to correct something.
You said I'm arguing for a regime change. The regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little BS.
Yes, but he made the point that the regime is still... He made the point the regime is still there, and the vice president appears to be much more compliant with running Venezuela the way America would prefer for its national security than Maduro. So that's what Michael said. He didn't advocate regime change. Let me bring in Coleman Hughes. Coleman,
kidnapping the president is
not regime change. Hang on, Carl. Let me bring in...
Yeah, so it was a good move here, bringing up the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Lopez here, and betting on the fact that Michael Knowles wouldn't know the name of that guy. Which he didn't, which was smart. A little bit of a slip up using the word regime change, because they had specified, both Kyle and Michael Knowles specified that, what Trump is doing is not regime change because they've left the regime in place, at least, in terms of the vice president. And so that was just the wrong word to use, because functionally he's still correct, because Michael Knowles is arguing for intervention in a place that he can't even name. He doesn't even know what the structure of this is or what the situation is. And the reality is, he just takes marching orders. The second this happened, the second the news broke that this happened, Michael Knowles was prepared to trot out the administration talking points. That's really how all of this stuff works, especially at the Daily Wire with war hawks like Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles. And that's the interesting thing to me, is that here you have him doing this neocon routine that all of us have seen before. All of us know what this is. And it has had some life breathed into it for the moment because of this capture of Maduro, as well as the fact that it was very spectacular and a quick military intervention that seems to be over for the moment. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen with this trial or what the future of Venezuela is. But for now, these neocons and these war hawks get to come out and say this was the right thing to do and what a perfect move it was and a perfect operation, and this is exactly what America should be doing. That's not going to last. That is the type of shit that is going to make Trump and the Republican Party politically unsalvageable, probably just within the next year. Now, it depends. If Venezuela goes away, what they want and need to have happen is for Venezuela to go away and disappear from the public conversation. Because if that happens, that will first of all imply that there's some stability with the situation, that it hasn't completely collapsed, and the American political conversation can move on to other things, and we won't be talking about this protracted war or collapse or regime change in Venezuela. If it turns into something like that, if by the midterms or further than that, we're still talking about Venezuela, that's going to be a huge fucking problem for Trump, because this came out of nowhere. And if it ends up creating perpetual problems, that is going to pretty much be a death sentence for the Republican Party in general. And that's on top of this thing about Greenland, which Trump doesn't really seem to have much support about at all. But here you see Michael Knowles completely ready to support invasion of Greenland, will support virtually anything that Trump does. So that's what Kyle's getting at here with this whole cuck bit, and it must have been very cathartic to say that to his face. I'll say a little restrained in that particular moment on the part of Kyle, which I think was a good move. He slipped that little joke in nicely, and I think genuinely made Michael Knowles look like an idiot here and a psycho. And that's really just the only thing you can do. The thing about these debates is everybody's going to get their talking points off. It's very rare that you perform well enough in a debate that it actually just completely throws your opponent off. Although Anna Kasparian did have a debate with Pearl recently where she just absolutely obliterated her. It was like super fucking awkward in certain moments where Pearl just like completely was unprepared. She's this like anti-feminist debater here. Let me play a clip of that real quick just so you can see.
Are you just making things up? Pearl, what are you doing? Like, seriously. Next question. How many women die every year during childbirth?
Not many.
This country has the highest maternal mortality rate of any developed country, so a lot of women do die as a result of pregnancy and childbirth, yes.
Pearl isn't saying anything. What?
Got this, Pearl!
Yeah, so these right-wingers are getting fucking washed. But my point before being that a lot of times with these debates, it's just like everybody gets their shit off and kind of, it's all just a matter of who can do the best performance of walking away like you won. Because everybody's going to do that performance. Everybody's going to hold the line on whatever they're saying and not admit that they were wrong. Even in the moments where you catch someone not knowing something or slipping up, usually they recover and then it just continues. And that's why there is this question about like how useful is debate. You have these conversations. We've only watched the right wing become more radicalized and this fascism sort of encroaching to the point where this guy, Michael Knowles, is quite insane and I think comes off insanely creepy. And always has. And yet he's really part and parcel for the right-wing movement at this point. He doesn't really stand out, you know? Whereas there was a time where a guy like this would be particularly odious in any political space. But that's just not the case anymore. So how much good does it do to argue with a guy like that? I think not that much good, except for the fact that I think it's probably time for the left to stop overthinking and just do stuff, you know, especially if it comes to a debate where you're just basically pushing past someone and getting your message out there and kind of elbowing them out of the way and being aggressive, being a bit of a brawler. I think that's the type of energy that is needed from the left in the political discourse at the moment, because I think there's a demand for it from the American population for whatever reason, but also it's just necessary to, you know, blow some of these idiots out of the water, because even when they have terrible arguments, they're incredibly unappealing. Most of them are uncharismatic, and the things they say, the things they have to say are just openly appalling. But by sort of having this bullying affect and coming off as the most aggressive party, they've actually been able to convince a lot of people that this is a viable form of politics. And so there has to be a version of that on the left where we can kind of just elbow people in the face and tell them to shut up. And I think Kyle did a great job of that here, because particularly Michael Knowles is just in an untenable position there, because nobody supports this shit that he's saying about war, and he's just going so far with it and so unquestioning and talking about going back to, you know, this classical version of international policy, which Kyle is right to call might makes right. And anytime you hear classical from these guys, that just means reactionary. They're just saying that they want to undo decades of progress. That's all classical means. And so I think people like this, and kind of the whole Daily Wire brand is like this at this point. That's Ben Shapiro's outfit. You know, they're going to be the sinking ship of the conservative movement. They always seem to survive somehow, and they may end up having more staying power than the sort of new fascist right. But at the same time, the new fascist right is going to maintain its appeal probably for a while, because it's so fueled by culture war. There's always going to be a new juicy culture war moment. Even the ICE stuff with the shooting of Renee Nicole Good, there are plenty of people who are taking the reactionary side on that, because it's something for them to chew on, and personality-wise, that's what they're inclined to. So when they get a piece of culture war red meat, it kind of rejuvenates their engagement with that side of politics. But this war stuff doesn't work like that. People are sick of it, and it's bleak, and it's hard to think about, and people don't have good opinions and impressions of war in general. And I think that most people, not all people, but most people have a bit of a conscience about it when they find themselves defending an act of war. I think most people don't want to do that. You know, I don't know. I think Americans in general are sick of that type of mentality. It's one of the reasons that Israel's grip on the culture has crumbled so much, because people don't have an appetite for seeing this type of destruction, and it's become ubiquitous with what America is and does, even in our own minds, for a long time now. And so Michael Knowles is embodying, and that's really just the wickedness of people like him. He does not mind embodying the death and destruction that is wrought by things like this. Because you can make sort of ho-humming and, rationalized arguments for why this or that has to be done. Michael Knowles isn't really doing that and isn't interested in doing that. He just is interested in pursuing American power. And what he says is that America is an empire, and we've always been an empire, and we don't like looking at it that way, but that's the truth. And he's 100% telling the truth there. It's one of the most honest things that he has ever said. And it's about as honest as any conservative is going to be about this issue. And so that's really the landscape here, because you have a conservative who's saying America is an empire and we are going to pursue our imperial interests. And then you have people who oppose that. So then there's a lot of this muck in the middle of like, well, America has to do this and we have to intervene. And it's not really imperialism because it's really this. And I don't think Michael Knowles is doing his party any favors by advocating for these war acts in this way. It's only going to help the left regain ground. This has happened before. I mean, Obama was swept into the office on the back of the left's critique of the Iraq war winning out in the culture. I wouldn't say the left was deliberately responsible for that, but ultimately they ended up being the ones who were on the right side of that argument culturally, and the person who won the presidency in a very strong way was playing to those leftist sentiments about war. So if Trump keeps going down this path, especially with stuff like Greenland and getting us embroiled into a bunch of shit, that's what's going to happen, is that the next person who comes to power, however that may be, is going to be swept in the power on the backs of ending war and being anti-war. Because when there are these wars happening and they're very unpredictable and explosive, no pun intended, and destructive and murderous, it takes up a lot of oxygen politically. It's hard to focus on anything else. And there was an innovation in American warfare that happened around the time of the Iraq War and all the other wars that sort of sprung out of that, which was that they realized that you could keep it a lot quieter if you put other things in front of the American public for them to consume. And you sort of keep the warfare, if you have enough resources to keep the warfare somewhat hidden and somewhat under discussed in the media, then you can kind of keep the gravy train going. And that's how we got this forever war pattern that happened throughout the beginning of this century. And so that's the real thing where Trump is fucking up here, because we've seen with Trump that people are willing to accept a lot of his culture war bullshit. This ICE stuff about ICE shooting people, it's going to take more than that for people to like really turn on Trump. This shit is unpopular. We already know that. He won twice, even though it's unpopular. That's not really the factor here. The factor is that the culture war stuff is powerful, but the war stuff cuts to something even deeper in American culture, and it's gonna be hard for them to stay away from that topic, especially if you have fucking creeps like Michael Knowles that are the ones trotting it out. It's really interesting to see a younger guy. Usually it's really old, decrepit dudes that are making these type of arguments, but this guy wants to be trotting out this conservative neocon shit for the rest of his life. And I think Trump seems to be digging himself into that hole for no reason. And it's not going to make it easier for him to like shut down elections and retain power forever. Being embroiled in overseas conflicts is not going to make it easy for him to repress at home. Not saying it's going to be impossible, but overall the plan just doesn't make a lot of sense. He would probably be in a lot better shape if he wasn't doing shit like that. So frankly, keep it up. And Michael Knowles and everybody over there at the Daily Wire, keep it up. You guys are doing great work. Everybody hates you.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity.